Hi there, I'm Olivia Prescott. At 34, I had a quiet Boston life, a stable finance career, and a past buried under ambition. Then came the letter, one line in my aunt's will. The house belongs to Olivia. It always has. Returning home, I expected closure. Instead, my estranged mother, sister, and brother circled like vultures, armed with smiles and forged papers. They hadn't come to grieve, they'd come to take. And I was done being the peacekeeper. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thought. They say every family has a crack. Mine was a mosaic of them. Hairline fractures running beneath polite smiles, widening through whispered blame, and eventually collapsing in a soundless implosion no one dared to name. I grew up in the kind of suburban house that looked like it belonged in a real estate brochure. White siding, trimmed lawn, 2 stories of hopeful fiction nestled in Charlotte's quieter side. From the outside, we were everything a Southern family should be. On the inside, we were something else entirely. My father, Martin Prescott, was a structural engineer. Ironically, the man who understood the integrity of buildings couldn't keep his own life from falling apart. When the 2008 housing crash hit, he lost his job, and with it, any sense of identity. He started drinking at first out of guilt, then habit. And finally because sobriety no longer made sense. My mother, Gloria, responded the only way she knew how: control. Her warmth evaporated like rain on asphalt. What was once a loving, spirited woman became a sharp-edged disciplinarian who counted minutes, measured attitudes, and tolerated nothing she couldn't mold. Vanessa, my older sister, learned early how to perform the role of the perfect daughter. She played it well. Cheer captain, high GPA, always a thin smile and a flattering lie, ready for whatever mood Mom carried that day. She knew which battles to pick. She never picked mine, and Miles, our youngest, arrived as the golden boy Mom desperately needed after Dad fell apart. He could set the curtains on fire and somehow earn praise for trying to innovate. Mistakes were adorable when he made them. When I did, they were character flaws. I was the middle child, the translator, the scapegoat, the invisible glue, and the convenient target, depending on the day. I learned early to read moods like weather, to patch wounds no one admitted existed, to keep my voice even when I wanted to scream. Peacekeeper, problem solver, overfunctioner. My entire childhood felt like balancing on the edge of a dull blade, not sharp enough to kill you outright, but relentless in its pressure. Things finally shattered the year I turned 21. Dad had been quietly embezzling money from a small contractor firm, where he'd taken a low-level job, nothing glamorous, just desperate. The day they arrested him, Mom didn't cry. She poured a glass of iced tea, sat at the dining table, and said, "This is what happens when you listen to people who think chasing dreams matters more than protecting a family." I didn't realize she meant me until days later when she brought it up again. How I'd encouraged Dad to give it one more try in construction. "You fed his fantasy, Olivia," she snapped. "You lit the match." Then came Vanessa's accusation. She barged into my room, trembling and furious, waving Miles's tuition envelope like it was a warrant. "You took it," she hissed. "Don't act like you didn't. It's always you, Olivia. You think we don't notice how you sit there pretending you're better than the rest of us?" I remember standing there, stunned, with my hands still dripping dishwater. I hadn't even seen the envelope. The kitchen was silent except for the slow ticking of the clock. I looked at Mom, hoping, just hoping, for her to say something that made sense. Instead, she folded her arms and looked at me like a stranger. "You've always had a selfish streak," she said. That night, I packed a duffel bag and left. I didn't slam the door. I didn't even cry. There are moments when grief is so old, it doesn't scream anymore. It just exhales. I took the last bus out of Charlotte and called the only person who ever saw me without judgment, my father's sister, Eleanor. Eleanor Prescott was a contradiction, sharp-tongued, reclusive, always in faded overalls, and usually covered in clay dust. Her studio was tucked behind her craftsman bungalow like a secret haven where no one played roles or blamed anyone for being too much. She made sculptures that looked like broken people caught mid-healing, and maybe that's why I felt safe there. She never told me to move on, just handed me tea and let me sit. "You don't owe them anything," she said once, while carving a figure with a cracked chest, "but you owe yourself peace. I stayed in touch with her through the years, birthdays, calls at midnight, packages filled with books and handwritten notes. She was my family when the rest became noise. Everyone else faded into holiday photos I wasn't in and stories I stopped wanting to hear. I put myself through school, built a career in finance, moved to Boston, and built a life brick by brick. Alone, but solid. Not flashy, not loud, just mine. For over a decade, I didn't set foot in Charlotte. That city held too much stale breath, too many ghosts wrapped in my last name, and honestly, I thought I'd left that entire version of myself behind. I told myself it was better this way, safer, cleaner, less messy. But healing doesn't always mean forgetting. Sometimes it means revisiting the ruins to see what still stands. I just didn't expect the invitation to come in the form of a letter from a probate lawyer. When I opened the envelope, my hands trembled. Not from grief, but from memory. D. Eleanor had passed away, peacefully in her sleep. She left no funeral instructions, just a single sentence in her will that changed everything. The house belongs to Olivia. It always has. It was more than a house. It was the only place I'd ever felt safe. And now, it was mine. Or so I thought. The plane descended over Charlotte just after sunset. Through the window, I could see a grid of neighborhoods, porch lights flickering like fireflies over rows of nearly identical houses, little fortresses of history, good or bad. As we landed, I braced myself for the past. Funny how grief doesn't always come with tears. Sometimes it comes with logistics. The next morning, I stood in front of Eleanor's house, my house now, just staring. The paint was peeling slightly, the iron gate had rusted at the hinge, and the sculpture of the woman in the garden had a missing hand. I remembered when she carved it, said broken things deserve to be displayed, not hidden. I pressed my palm against the front door before unlocking it. It creaked open like a breath held too long. Inside, everything smelled of clay, cedarwood, and old paper. Her favorite jazz records were stacked by the player, and the old green velvet armchair still had an indentation shaped like her spine. I should have cried, but all I felt was stillness, like the house was waiting for me to breathe first. I found the lawyer's envelope on the kitchen table, exactly where he said it would be. Inside, the official deed, her updated will, and a handwritten note on thick paper. You never had to earn this, Olivia. You just had to come home. Her script was still sharp and deliberate, like she carved even with a pen. I read it 3 times before folding it slowly and sliding it into my pocket. The next few days were filled with practicalities, meeting the estate manager, sorting utilities, changing locks. I requested to work remotely from my firm in Boston. They didn't question it. They knew better than to ask. Grief gives you a temporary pass to disappear. I wasn't sure how long mine would last. The house sat on a quiet cul-de-sac, where everyone seemed to know everyone, or remember everything. I met a neighbor, Mr. Connors, while putting out the trash. He gave me a polite nod, then asked, "Thought your folks had already moved in last week?" I paused. "My folks?" "Yeah," he said, scratching his beard. "Your sister, tall, black SUV, had some movers with her. Said you'd be joining them once you got in." I didn't react, not with my face. My body stayed still, but inside, something clicked into place. A cold metal sound like a lock turning from the wrong side. "Did they come inside?" I asked calmly. "Didn't see it myself," he shrugged. "Just figured y'all were moving in together." I thanked him and walked back inside. The door shut a little louder than I meant it to. Maybe it was just noise. Or maybe it was my pulse finally catching up. That night, I double-checked every window. The locks were still intact. But I installed temporary sensors anyway. The idea of Vanessa walking through this house without Eleanor's blessing, without mine, made my skin crawl. I sat in the same armchair Eleanor used to nap in and stared at the wall for hours. The silence didn't comfort me anymore. It felt like something had already been disturbed, and I had arrived too late to stop it. They knew she'd died. Of course they did. The obituary was public, but I hadn't spoken to any of them since the day I left. 10 years of silence isn't an accident, it's protection. But now, they were circling again. I should have known peace would never come free, and I should have known that home, no matter how sacred, was just another thing they'd try to take. Grief should have been a private affair, But in my family, even grief became a performance. Another stage where guilt wore lipstick and lies came dressed as concern. I had barely unpacked my suitcase before their shadows began circling. I'd hoped they wouldn't come. Deep down, I knew they would. Vultures don't skip funerals, they wait for them. The memorial was held at a small gallery Eleanor used to rent out for her community workshops. She never wanted flowers, hymns, or eulogies. Let people remember me through the work, not through sanitized words, she used to say. So the gallery was filled with her sculptures, stone, clay, wire. They stood taller than most of the people in the room, silent witnesses to her story. I wore a black blazer over dark jeans, hair pinned back, posture straight. I wasn't mourning in public. I was bracing. I was halfway through a quiet conversation with one of Eleanor's sculptor friends when I felt it. A subtle shift in the room, like a draft from a door that hadn't opened yet. I turned my head and saw them standing just beyond the refreshments table. Gloria, my mother, wearing a beige trench coat too warm for the weather. Vanessa beside her, hair too perfect for sincerity. Miles trailing behind, looking uncomfortable in a suit that didn't quite fit. They didn't look like people paying respects. They looked like people measuring property lines. Gloria reached me first. "Olivia," she said, voice soft, smile practiced. "You look, well?" The pause between her words was deliberate, calculated. "I didn't expect to see you," I replied. I didn't offer a hug. I didn't offer anything. She wasn't here to grieve. She was here to reclaim. Vanessa stepped forward, smile tighter than her dress. "Of course we came. She was family." I stared at her. "So was I. And you had no problem erasing me." "She would have appreciated it," I said, keeping my tone neutral. Neutral was safer than kind. Kind would have cracked. We stood in that strange, strained silence until Gloria broke it with a sentence that pretended to be innocent. "Must be a lot inheriting everything, the house, the land. All that space, just for one person." I met her eyes. "I manage." Vanessa laughed once, short and hollow. "Well, we just thought maybe it's something we could figure out together. As a family, I mean technically she was our aunt too." The word technically sat between us like an insult dressed as logic. My hands didn't move, but I felt a fire crawl up my spine. I kept my voice steady. "She left it to me, alone. That was her choice." Miles shifted his weight. "You haven't even been around. You haven't lived here in years. You really think she meant for you to keep all of it?" I nodded. "Yes, I do." Gloria exhaled, her smile tightening like thread being pulled. "We're not here to argue. We're here to reconnect. It's been a long time." I tilted my head. Reconnection doesn't usually start with property discussions. There were people watching now. The murmurs in the background had softened. Someone cut the music. The room seemed to shrink. Vanessa leaned in, eyes narrowing. "So you're really going to keep everything? Just like that? After all we've been through as a family?" There it was, the family card. Laminated and fingerprinted from years of misuse. I looked at her, then at Gloria. "You weren't there when she got sick. You didn't visit her in the hospital. You didn't call, not once. She wasn't convenient to you, so you stayed gone. But now that she's gone for good, you want the pieces she left behind." Vanessa clenched her jaw. Gloria looked momentarily stunned. Miles looked at the floor. None of them spoke. I stepped forward, voice low. "This house is mine. The will is legal. The decision is final. If you want to honor her, walk away." Vanessa's expression hardened into something uglier. "You think you're above us now? You think one signature makes you better than blood?" I leaned in just enough for her to hear. "No, it just makes me free from it." They left soon after, not bothering to say goodbye. The silence they left behind wasn't peaceful. It was loaded, like the quiet before thunder. I thought that confrontation was the storm. I was wrong. It was just the pressure drop. The real storm hadn't even started yet. I thought the confrontation at the memorial would mark the end of it. A line drawn, a door closed. But some doors don't stay closed, especially when the people on the other side have spent years learning how to slip through cracks. And in my family, cracks are just entry points for manipulation, wearing the mask of reconciliation. It started with a phone call. I almost didn't answer when I saw Mom flashing across the screen. 10 years of silence had turned that word into static. But I picked up. Maybe I was curious. Maybe I wanted proof that she hadn't changed. I got both. Her voice was too soft, like she'd practiced kindness just enough to make it sound almost real. "Olivia, I know things were tense at the service," she said, pausing like she expected me to fill the silence. I didn't. "But I want us to talk, really talk. You've been away for so long. We're still family, you know. That doesn't go away." That was her opening pitch. Family as a catch-all for guilt, leverage, and forgotten accountability. "You said I wasn't family anymore," I said. "That hasn't gone away either." She sighed. An exaggerated exhale that tried to sound motherly. "That was a long time ago. People say things when they're hurt. And your sister, Vanessa, she's trying. She really is." A few hours later, a text from Vanessa lit up my phone. No apology. Just a photo of her 2 kids sitting on a couch with a message that read, "They'd love to meet their aunt someday. Maybe lunch next week?" I stared at the screen for a while. Her attempt at emotional leverage was transparent, but effective manipulation never needs to be subtle. It just needs to hit the right bruise. I didn't respond. Not to that, not right away. But I kept the photo, not for them, for evidence. That's how my brain started working again. Not emotionally, logically. 2 days later, Miles showed up outside the house. No call, no warning. Just a knock at the door and the same uncertain smile he wore when he was 15 and trying to borrow money for weed. He looked thinner, tired, but still too smooth in his words. "Hey," he said. "I figured I'd stop by. Thought we could catch up." I let him sit on the porch, but didn't invite him in. That line, at least, remained intact. He talked in circles, about the past, about trying to get clean, about how hard life had been. Eventually, it came out. "I wouldn't ask if I had any other option," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "But I've got some medical bills. It's temporary, just until I land on my feet." I looked at him. "You're standing on your feet right now, Miles, but you keep leaning." He didn't like that. He shifted again, smiled like he thought charm might work where guilt failed. It didn't. Over the next week, the frequency increased. Gloria called again, this time with a story about a fall she had in the kitchen. How the hospital bills were piling up. How the house she was renting was too expensive now that her disability checks were late. Vanessa sent another photo, her husband carrying groceries. The caption, "One job between us. It's been hard." They were circling, not just physically, but psychologically. A slow drip of contact meant to wear me down. If they couldn't guilt me through tears, they'd do it through exhaustion. And that was the part I understood better than I wanted to. See, my family doesn't argue with fists. They argue with patterns, with fatigue, with nostalgia and the word "remember" said in just the right tone. But I remembered everything. And that was exactly why I didn't answer the next few calls. Still, it wore on me. I found myself triple-checking the locks at night. I began keeping a notebook by the door with time-stamped notes of any car that slowed near the driveway. And the worst part? There was a part of me that still wanted to believe one of them might actually mean it, might want to repair instead of manipulate. That's what made them dangerous, not the lies, but the parts of them that still knew where my soft spots were buried. The doors weren't closed. Not yet. They were just slightly ajar. And they knew it. I was beginning to realize the fight wasn't going to be dramatic or sudden. It was going to be slow, relentless, strategic. I could feel it coming, but I hadn't seen the full shape of it yet. That would change soon. And when it did, I'd realize they weren't just trying to get back into my life. They were already inside. The first time something felt off, I dismissed it. A cabinet door left open. I figured maybe I'd forgotten. I'd been tired, scattered. I told myself it was nothing. But when nothing keeps happening in the exact same way, it stops being coincidence. It becomes a pattern, and patterns, especially in families like mine, are always deliberate. It was Mrs. Helen, my neighbor across the street, who finally said something out loud. We were chatting over the hedges one morning while I was watering the front plants. She leaned on her cane, squinting like she wasn't sure if she should speak or stay quiet. Then she said, "Your sister, Vanessa, isn't it? She's been by a few times." I paused mid-spray. "Excuse me?" "She said you asked her to bring some things by." House repairs, something about organizing your aunt's old studio. Seemed in a rush, real determined. I kept my face neutral, but every muscle in my body tensed. When was this? Oh, maybe 3-4 times, always during the day. You were probably out. She had a key, so I figured. I forced a smile. Thanks, Mrs. Helen, that's helpful. She nodded and shuffled off toward her mailbox, unaware that she'd just dropped a bomb and walked away from the crater. Back inside, I checked everything. Doors, locks, windows. Nothing looked forced, but something had been touched. A ceramic owl I'd placed near the window had shifted an inch to the right. A drawer in the hallway credenza sat slightly ajar, when I never leave it open. I went to the mailbox and found a few envelopes stacked backwards. I always stack them facing up. Always. One of them had been opened and taped shut again, not carefully, sloppily, like someone in a hurry, hoping I wouldn't notice. That night, I installed motion sensors on the back door and changed the passcode on the security system. I also ordered 2 discrete indoor cameras and scheduled an appointment to have the locks fully replaced. Deadbolts, front and back. I didn't want to accuse anyone until I had proof. But deep down, I already knew. A few days later, that proof came. I checked the newly installed porch camera footage out of habit and saw it. Clear as day. A man in a dark hoodie approaching the back door. He had a key. He opened the door like he lived there. Walked in, stayed for 33 minutes. Walked out with something tucked under his coat. I paused the footage, zoomed in, frame by frame. It wasn't a stranger. It was Vanessa's husband. I felt the kind of rage that doesn't roar. It narrows. A cold, focused fire. He had no right, no permission. And he hadn't even bothered to cover his face. That's what struck me most. They weren't afraid. They thought they were entitled. I checked the hallway closet. A folder was gone, one with legal documents from the estate, things Eleanor had prepared, insurance records, tax papers. Nothing they could use legally, but enough to raise suspicion if they twisted it. That same afternoon, I called my lawyer and told him everything. I don't want to make noise unless I have to, I said, but I need to be ready if they push. You're past noise, he said. This is criminal trespassing, Olivia. He was right. But instinct told me they weren't done. This wasn't just curiosity. This was a setup, a test, and I was done being polite. I started logging everything. Date, time, who called, who stopped by, what they said. I printed photos from the footage and filed them in a locked drawer. I moved Eleanor's important documents to a fireproof safe. Every click of that lock sounded like armor tightening. Because this wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about territory, power, and they'd just declared war. I used to think paranoia was a flaw, something shameful, something you should fix. But now I see it for what it really is. A survival instinct. It's the voice inside that tells you something's wrong before you have the proof. By the time I had the proof, it wasn't paranoia anymore. It was confirmation. I hired Michael Barron, a private investigator referred by one of my clients back in Boston. Ex-police, clean record, no theatrics. The kind of man who didn't blink twice when I showed him camera footage of my brother-in-law breaking into my house and casually walking out with legal files. You're not being dramatic, he said after watching the clip. You're being hunted, quietly, patiently. Within 4 days, Michael had everything I'd been afraid to suspect. Miles had 2 outstanding warrants for disorderly conduct and 1 civil lawsuit pending over unpaid rent. He was over $20,000 in debt, mostly to online gambling platforms. Vanessa and her husband had maxed out 5 credit cards and were behind on their mortgage. They'd been evicted twice in the past 6 years. Most of their bills were in collections. But the real blow came when Michael pulled court records and found that Gloria, my mother, had recently consulted with a law firm about contesting Eleanor's will. Their argument? Eleanor lacked mental capacity in the final months. They were laying groundwork, and it wasn't just hearsay. Gloria had signed an affidavit claiming Eleanor had shown symptoms of confusion and delusion, conveniently forgetting that she hadn't spoken to Eleanor in years. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the printed report. My coffee had gone cold. Michael slid over one more document, his tone flatter than usual. This is the worst part, he said. They've already been in contact with a real estate agent. They told her they're co-owners of this property and want a preliminary valuation. They plan to sell it, Olivia, without you. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My hand was steady, but something beneath my ribs twisted hard. Grief turned inside out. It wasn't just betrayal. It was theft with a smile. They weren't coming for me with lawyers. They were coming with lies, pretending to be blood entitled to what wasn't theirs. I flipped to the last page and saw the name of the real estate agent, Diane Landry. I knew her. Not well, but enough to know she was competent, honest. She wouldn't push a deal without checking ownership. That gave me time, not much, but enough. That night, I searched through every drawer and closet in Eleanor's house, looking for any sign, any confirmation that this insanity had a paper trail. I found it tucked beneath a false bottom in her old art supply cabinet. A journal. Handwritten, clear, deliberate, like every word mattered. April the 2nd. Gloria called again, after 5 years of silence. She wanted to know if I'd updated my will. That's how she started the conversation. No hello, no how are you, how are. Just, have you changed it yet? April 30th. Vanessa dropped by unannounced, brought her husband. He looked around like the house was already his, said I shouldn't waste all this space on myself. June 15th. I made it official today. The new will is signed. Everything goes to Olivia. She's the only one who visits me without checking what's in my fridge first. Every entry tightened something in my chest. Anger, yes, but also heartbreak. Eleanor had seen this coming. She'd spent her last year documenting the slow approach of a family that had abandoned her until there was something left to gain. And she still had to hide it. Because even in death, they'd try to twist the truth. I scanned and encrypted the journal, sent copies to my lawyer and Michael. Then I slid the original into a locked box and buried it beneath the floorboards in Eleanor's old studio. If they wanted to dig for something, let them start there. The next morning, I stood outside the house, looking at the structure she'd built piece by piece over decades. Brick by brick, memory by memory. I could almost hear her voice, sharp and dry. Don't cry over what's behind you. Fight for what's in front. And I would, but not with panic, with precision. Because now I knew the truth. I had the evidence, and they had no idea how far I was willing to go to protect what was mine. I knew logic wouldn't wake them up, only consequence would. So I stopped answering their calls, stopped letting them have access to my time, my breath, my silence. I booked a fake work trip, told a few neighbors I'd be out of town, loud enough for someone with nosy ears. Then I packed a small bag, moved to a friend's guest house for a few nights. The trap had to look effortless. Before leaving, I contacted a real estate attorney and detective, Will Garrison, the same one who uncovered their little performance. We installed hidden cameras in the living room, front hall, and back porch. Every inch of the house now whispered to me. And this time, I wanted it to scream for the record. If they want to trespass, Will had said, let them. Just make sure the cops arrive before they bolt. By the second day, I got a ping from the camera system. Movement on the back door. Vanessa's husband, Derek, fumbling with a lockpick like he'd done it before. 2 hours later, my mother stepped in like she owned the place. Tight smile, arms folded, bossing around a junk removal crew. They brought boxes, took photos, even taped a for sale by owner note on the front porch. Miles didn't show. That part stung more than I expected. They didn't just break in, they set up camp. One of the cleaners told Vanessa the hardwood floors were salvageable if sanded. I watched the footage of her nodding, pointing, like this house was already hers. Like my name on the deed was just decoration. My attorney said, we have enough now, call it in. When the patrol car pulled up late that afternoon, it was almost too perfect. I watched through the live feed as Derek panicked, fumbling with a bin of family photos. Gloria raised her voice. There must be some mistake. The officer barely blinked before reading them their rights. Trespassing, breaking and entering, violating a restraining order filed last month after they harassed me via text. I pressed charges, calmly, firmly, without joy. I didn't attend the hearing in person. My lawyer said the footage spoke louder than I ever could. It's rare we get confessions in HD, he chuckled. Vanessa's voice, defensive, brittle, repeated over and over on tape. This house was always meant to be mine. No, I thought. It was always meant to be mine because I never took it for granted. Because I never used love as a weapon. It wasn't revenge. It was alignment. It was the law finally catching up to the shadows that had always walked just behind my family's smiles. Afterward, Miles reached out. Not with excuses, but with silence. He left a message. Just one. I wasn't part of that. I knew it was wrong. I didn't reply. Some truths don't need commentary. The cameras stayed up. Not because I feared them, but because I trusted no one with keys, but me. Gloria tried to call once more. Her voice cracked in the voicemail. You've made your point, but she still didn't say sorry, not once. Power without accountability was her lifelong addiction. I wasn't going to feed it anymore. Standing on the porch that evening, watching the sun slip behind Eleanor's neglected rose bushes, I felt nothing dramatic. No satisfaction, no anger, just breath. Just stillness. Just the knowledge that for once, I had chosen myself without asking permission. And that was enough to sleep through the night without checking the locks twice. They didn't see it coming. That's the thing about people who manipulate. They never imagine the target stops playing along. My lawyer filed civil charges within 72 hours of the break-in. Unlawful entry, attempted property fraud, and falsifying ownership. The police reports, combined with video footage, emails, and witness statements, formed a case so airtight even Gloria had nothing to say. I watched from the back of the room as Vanessa shifted in her chair like the walls were closing in. Derek avoided eye contact entirely. Miles didn't show up that day. I wasn't surprised. The court didn't need drama. They needed facts. We had copies of the forged rental application Vanessa submitted to a real estate broker, claiming partial ownership. Her name was never on the deed, but she'd signed an intent to lease form and even arranged for property valuation. Derek had emailed a contractor estimates for renovating the master bedroom, like they were already living there. The judge didn't yell. He didn't need to. When he asked, "Did you understand you had no legal right to the property?" And Vanessa answered, "We assumed Olivia wouldn't want the burden." Even the stenographer paused typing. Gloria's name didn't appear on the contracts, but it didn't have to. My attorney presented call records showing her contacting Eleanor's former primary doctor weeks before her death, asking about signs of decline. She'd also met with an attorney to draft a challenge to Eleanor's will on the basis of mental incompetence. The documents were never filed, but the intent was clear. When confronted, Gloria offered no apology, only one cold remark. I was trying to protect the family legacy. I remember staring at her hands during that hearing, perfectly manicured, steady, as if none of this touched her. Miles contacted us the day after that hearing. He wanted to speak privately, no lawyers. I agreed, reluctantly. We met at a cafe near the courthouse. He looked thinner, calmer, sober, or at least trying. "I've been in a program for 6 weeks," he said. I didn't know what they were planning, but I know I let it happen. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked for permission to testify. "Not for you," he added. "For myself, so I don't walk away pretending I did nothing." For the first time in a long while, I saw him as a man. Not a broken child, not a pawn in their plan, just a man choosing a line to stand on. His statement was the final nail. He admitted hearing Vanessa and Gloria discuss preparing to challenge the will, and how Derek joked about getting rid of the old sculptures and putting in a pool table. His words dismantled the last of their defense. The judge didn't offer jail time, but the civil penalties were severe. Vanessa and Derek were ordered to pay $80,000 in damages across 5 years. They also signed a formal renunciation of any claim to the Prescott estate, effective immediately. A no-contact order was issued, covering me, my property, and any third-party interference. Gloria's punishment wasn't financial. She received a formal reprimand from the court and was flagged in an elder exploitation registry. Her attempt to influence Eleanor's medical evaluation, though not pursued criminally, was documented as malicious interference. She sent me a letter through her church pastor, unsigned but unmistakably hers. "One day you'll understand what I did was for love." I didn't reply. I didn't rage. I filed it away with the rest. Evidence not of her concern, but her control. After the hearings, my lawyer asked if I felt vindicated. I didn't. That word didn't belong to me. What I felt was emptiness, followed by breath. Like I'd been exhaling for 10 years and finally realized I could stop. This wasn't revenge. It was release. I had spent years believing silence was peace. It wasn't. It was suppression. And now, piece by piece, I was taking my voice back. Miles called one last time before leaving town. I know I still have to prove I mean it, but thank you for not shutting the door completely. I didn't tell him I had. Not all the way, not forever. I simply said, do better, not for me, for your son. And that was it. The final word. The chapter closed, not with rage, but with rules. Not with forgiveness, but with truth. The silence after the storm felt unreal, almost artificial. For weeks my body stayed tense, like I expected another knock on the door, another letter, another name I didn't recognize trying to reach out on behalf of Gloria. But nothing came. Just birds in the morning and the familiar creak of the stairs under my feet. That's when I knew it was real. The house was mine, not just legally, but spiritually. For the first time, I walked through every room not as a guest, not as a threat, but as someone who belonged. I didn't rush to repaint or redecorate. The cracks on the wall, the dusty corners, even the odd shadows cast by Eleanor's sculptures, I kept them. Not out of nostalgia, but respect. She carved pain into beauty. Her studio became my meditation space. I opened the windows wide. I let in light she'd blocked for decades. And then I did something that would have terrified me years ago. I posted a flyer outside, on the old iron gate, handwritten in black ink. Weekly circle for those estranged by blood but not by worth. Saturdays, 10 a.m. The first week, no one came. The second, a woman named Carla showed up. She'd been disowned by her parents after coming out at 22. She just wanted to sit in the studio for an hour, surrounded by quiet. The next month, it was 3 people. By spring, I kept folding chairs in the garage because we needed extra seats. We didn't call it therapy. It wasn't a support group either. It was something between ritual and rebellion, each of us quietly unlearning that family means obedience, or guilt, or debt. Then one evening, I ran into Darren again, at the grocery store of all places. He looked different, older, but with that same calm presence I remembered from college. We'd been on mock trial together. He was the guy who'd always whisper the exact clause of a state statute, with his back turned like he wasn't helping. We talked for 20 minutes in the produce aisle. Then he asked if I wanted to walk. Just walk. I hadn't felt that safe saying yes to a man in years. Darren helped with some of the paperwork I still hadn't processed, things I'd been too numb or too drained to face alone. His way wasn't forceful. It was patient. The way he asked about Eleanor, about my studio, about the group, it wasn't curiosity, it was care. There was no rush into anything romantic. That wasn't the point. But little by little, we started sharing space. Coffee before Saturday sessions, reading on the back porch, silence that wasn't heavy, connection that didn't demand explanation. I used to think healing meant closure, but this house, the one they tried to strip from me, had become a place of opening. Every face that walked through the door brought a piece of me back I thought I'd lost. The girl who always had to hold the family together, she didn't live here anymore. The woman who lived here now didn't negotiate her right to peace. She built it. And invited others in, not out of pity, but solidarity. One afternoon, after our weekly gathering, Carla stayed behind. She looked around the studio and said, "It's strange. This place feels like it remembers things I haven't even told yet." I just nodded, because I knew exactly what she meant. I didn't cry when Miles's letter arrived. I didn't even pause. I read it once, folded it in half, and set it on the kitchen table beside my coffee. The handwriting was shaky, but unmistakably his. He said he was in rehab again. He said he was sorry, and this time, he didn't ask for money or forgiveness, just a chance to be better for his son, not for me. I waited 3 days before writing back, not because I needed time, but because I didn't want to reply with rage or pity. "You don't owe me anything," I wrote, "but you owe him everything. If you ever want to be a father, don't prove it to me. Prove it by staying sober long enough that he doesn't grow up looking for someone else to rescue him." I didn't sign it with love, just my name. That was enough. Weeks passed, The town grew quieter as summer settled. The community house was alive now. Soft lights, open doors, familiar voices. Every Wednesday, I sat with a group of women who'd been told they were too emotional, too loud, too difficult to love. We drank coffee, we sat in silence, and sometimes we cried. Mostly, though, we just listened. That was enough. Darren started coming by more often, usually with extra books or that ridiculous peach cobbler from his aunt. He never asked questions he didn't earn the right to ask. He fixed the leaky sink without needing praise, and when he brushed my hand while passing the dishes, I let it stay there a second longer than necessary. It felt ordinary, which was new, for me. Ordinary had never been safe before. Then came the post from Vanessa, a bitter paragraph laced with half-truths, implying fraud, manipulation, betrayal. She tagged no one, named no names, but everyone knew, and no one cared. The comments were quiet. A few likes, mostly from ghost accounts or the kind of friends who disappear when the lights come on. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Silence, when rooted in certainty, is louder than any scandal. Still, the sting remained. That sharp, familiar ache of being reduced to a story told by someone who never really saw you. But instead of unraveling, I got up and watered the garden. I trimmed the roses and repotted the lavender. Darren painted a new sign for the front porch. The Eleanor House. I didn't ask him to. He just knew, and I think that's when I realized I was building something that could outlast the noise. Some mornings, I walk past the back door and still expect to hear her, D. Eleanor, humming off-key, covered in clay. But the silence now doesn't hurt. It feels whole, like she's watching, not missing. I planted her favorite asters near the stone bench. They've started to bloom, stubborn and bright. She'd call them unapologetic. I didn't invite my mother to the opening night of the house. I knew she wouldn't come. But I saw her parked down the street for a few minutes, watching. Maybe trying to remember how it all became so far gone. I didn't wave. I just stood on the porch and watched her watch me. That was the closest we've come to understanding in years. That night, I stood inside the front room, surrounded by women who now call this place their anchor. There was laughter, the kind that doesn't apologize for being loud. There were stories of survival and stories not yet finished. One woman placed her hand on my shoulder and said, "I don't know who built this place, but she must have survived something big." I smiled. She did. Later, after the last guest left, Darren and I sat on the steps, wine in hand, watching the porch lights flicker. He asked me, "Do you ever miss them?" I didn't pretend to misunderstand. I answered honestly. Sometimes, but not the way I used to. I used to miss the idea of them. Now, I miss what never really existed. He leaned in, quiet. "You rebuilt something better." I looked at him, then at the house, the garden, the stars. "No, I built what should have been there all along." There's no grand ending to a story like mine. No slow-motion hug, no courtroom applause, no neat bow to wrap it all up. But there is peace. There is the kind of stillness that comes after a long storm. When the windows are open, the air smells like earth, and no one's yelling anymore. Forgiveness didn't come in a single moment. It arrived in pieces, through boundaries, silence, truth, through choosing not to fight every lie, through planting flowers instead of drafting replies, through understanding that not everyone who hurts you needs to hear your healing out loud. Blood may tie us to people, but choice defines our family. I chose Eleanor. I chose myself. I chose every stranger who walked into this house and saw themselves in my shadow and stayed. That's the thing about shadows. They can't exist without light. And now, finally, I'm standing in it.